Hello and welcome back to the Rekt Capital channel, and welcome to today's update about whether the Bitcoin bull market is over. Was there a bull market to begin with? There's a lot of questions about that as well that I get on my timeline on Twitter, so let's dive right in to today's update. It's incredible. It's incredible how closely Bitcoin was aligning with its historical pre-halving price tendencies. This is something I was talking about in a separate video as it was happening. I was talking about the weekly high or low that we see here. We tend to see it prior to the halving every time anyway, but this was the weekly high low we were looking at, and I was talking about all these different price tendencies that we see occur within this ascending triangle in this orange box prior to each and every halving. Unfortunately, we saw a breakdown from the weekly high low, so these price tendencies inherent in Bitcoin's price action, well, they were invalidated, and I have no problem admitting that because I try to look at the charts as objectively as possible to look at all of these different price tendencies and use those tendencies to potentially extrapolate them into future price action. But of course, Bitcoin was at a make or break point, and unfortunately, rather than making it, it broke, and we had severe catalysts. We have the coronavirus, we had the Plus token scam sale, and of course we had loads of liquidations which just added to this sell side momentum, this cascading sell side momentum. So everything was playing up rather nicely, but of course we had these negative catalysts that made Bitcoin break down. And what we have to look at, whether we're talking about whether this bull market is over and also whether it even happened, we have to look at the Bitcoin market cycles. And of course, these are going to be the halving events, these blue lines, these blue vertical lines, and each ranging period prior to a bull market is here in purple. So we have ranging periods every now and then right over here. These are essentially accumulation zones where bargain hunters tend to accumulate cheap Bitcoin because this is where they have the least amount of risk for the prospect of reward. So in other words, the prospect of upside severely outweighs the risk of downside. So this is essentially the point of maximum opportunity, at least in this cycle, because people argue, of course, that this is the point of maximum opportunity. But of course, not everybody was in the market prior to 2011. So every time we see a bottom prior to a new bull trend, prior to a new market cycle, this is the point of maximum opportunity for new investors, and investors even from prior to 2011, where they could just accumulate again if they really wanted to. In any case, we have to look at these ranging periods and just say that we have never, ever seen a pullback in Bitcoin's price action to test and revisit a ranging period. We've just never seen a correction like that, like we're seeing right now. So that just goes to show how anomalous of a price event this truly is. Of course, the top of this ranging period, which preceded the bull run right over here, this top of the ranging period is actually being retested as a support as we speak, but this has never ever been done before in Bitcoin's price action. So of course we're witnessing history in the making. We're witnessing a anomalous world global crisis in the form of coronavirus, let alone an anomalous price event in Bitcoin as well. So we're just seeing a lot of black swan events occur and coincide with one another. But having said that, we can't, based on this price action, based on market cycle analysis, we can't just say that this wasn't a bull market, because many people say on Twitter that this wasn't a bull market because we saw a lower high. This was merely a lower high tendency when comparing to the previous all-time high. So this was a lower high, but we saw the same tendency over here as well. So this was the beginning of the bull market, and then we saw prior to halving 2 a topping out before a pre-halving retrace. This was also a lower high, and we have to just say that we see this prior to every halving as well. This is halving 1. We saw a lower high here as well. So you can't go ahead and say that this wasn't a bull market because this was a lower high. We tend to see that tendency prior to every halving anyway. But in any case, I guess the people who are making that argument got that vindication in the form of this very strong sell-off, which was pretty much an outlier black swan event, which was very difficult to predict. So now we can just play the game of what if we actually saw these historical price tendencies actually play out. But in any case, so based on these market cycles, in my opinion, the bull run did occur. This this was a bull market, but of course this bull market is now most likely over because we saw that unprecedented crash, and it's going to be a tough time for Bitcoin as long as coronavirus continues to persist, unless the exponential growth rate curves across countries around the world subside and turn into logistic curves where the progress of these growth rates in new daily confirmed cases subside. We will see Bitcoin struggle a bit because uncertainty doesn't unfortunately fuel Bitcoin's price action to the upside. So we are seeing an unprecedented price event for Bitcoin. The only argument I can say, or at least make, for this being still a bull market is by looking at the previous ranging periods. And essentially speaking, I'm just going to say that this is all about retesting the top of this ranging period, and this has never happened after a strong rally towards the upside, after that bull trend to the upside. But we have seen a breakout past this ranging period, followed by a retest of the ranging period as a new support, and then we saw the bull trend. We've seen that happen here as well, right over here. This was essentially a very short ranging period. It was a V-shaped reversal bottom, but essentially speaking, we saw a breakout from here. And then, of course, this is the candle that retests that ranging period as a new support. And of course, we saw that here as well. Let me just zoom in here. We have this ranging period, which is also equally short as well. A breakout and then a retest right over here. And essentially speaking, we're seeing the same potential thing over here. Though it hasn't happened ever before, we are seeing this sort of technical movement that we've seen in the past cycles, but this time it's just spread across time, which is very interesting because we've seen that bull trend already happen, but now we're only seeing the retest happen now. So this is a very curious case. And I think that if this is a successful retest and we see some volume following through on that, it would be interesting to see whether that is actually the confirmation of this bull market that we actually never really got. Because remember, if we zoom in here, this was a breakout from the ranging period, but we actually never saw a successful retest of the top of this ranging period. So really interesting food for thought there. We'd have to have a lot of volume come in. This would have been the capitulation wick, and we'd need to see a lot of volume come in so that we can get that recovery in Bitcoin's price action. But at the same time, coronavirus as a threat to the global economy and people's health and safety around the world, that would need to subside for Bitcoin to truly recover properly going into the halving and even beyond the halving as well. So we've looked at a few market cycles for Bitcoin's price action in its entire 10-year price history, and we've come to the conclusion that we were enjoying a bull trend, but it's most likely the case that this bull trend is over, with the small caveat that we might be seeing an unprecedented price event occurring whereby we're just seeing an extended retest period of the ranging period that it broke out from before. This has never ever happened before, but we have to bear in mind that on a technical level, as long as we see some volume and that recovery occur, this is entirely possible. It's still a possibility, but it's never been done before, so I can't really say that with much confidence, unfortunately. But let's have a look at a different indicator, which gives us a slightly different conclusion. Let's have a look at the NVRV Z-score, and this is essentially an indicator that is very good in assessing when Bitcoin is undervalued relative to its fair value and when it's overvalued relative to its fair value. So essentially speaking, in the most simplistic term, it's very good to buy Bitcoin in this green area and sell Bitcoin in this red area. It operates very similar to the Fear and Greed Index, where we have extreme fear preceding financial opportunity and extreme greed preceding a sell-off. So very similar dynamics right over here. And what we need to bear in mind is that every time we see a ranging period in this green area where Bitcoin is undervalued according to the NVRV Z-score right over here, right? So if we just drag this over here. This is the ranging period for Bitcoin's price action, and this is essentially the bottom on the NVRV. We see that this bottom for the NVRV also occurs during a ranging period when Bitcoin is bottoming in its market cycle. So essentially speaking, this is the maximum point of financial opportunity right over here. And you can say the same exact thing here. This is the ranging period from around 2019 when Bitcoin bottomed at around $3,200, roughly speaking. This is also that time. So this is essentially the moment where the prospect of reward severely and far outweighs the risk of downside in Bitcoin's price action. And what the NVRV is actually telling us is that we haven't seen a bull market. And the bull market never even occurred in the very first place. So this video is titled, "Is Bitcoin in the bull market?" Or at least, "Is the Bitcoin bull market over?" It's very interesting to see that the NVRV is actually saying that this bull market never occurred in the first place, which is quite interesting to see, because if we just look at this NVRV score, this is the NVRV score which topped out at around 13,900, right? If we just do this, this was 13,900 on Bitcoin's price. So if we just drag this resistance on the NVRV score and do this, roughly speaking, we'll notice that we've been in corrective periods before, right? So we've seen these corrections before in the NVRV score. We've seen this upside and then a correction before continuation in the bull trend. And we saw a correction here as well. And essentially speaking, this correction has been occurring in alignment with previous corrections, roughly speaking, but it just could have gone either way. And unfortunately for Bitcoin, it went the other way when we're seeing this global crisis in the form of fears of a recession, which is partially stimulated by the fact that we're having a negative catalyst in the form of a global pandemic. So the NVRV score is saying that the bull market never occurred, but what it is saying also is that it has returned to this green value area, which essentially means that Bitcoin is undervalued relative to its fair market value. So we have to look at this green area and think to ourselves, if the NVRV is telling us that the prospect of reward far outweighs the risk of downside in terms of Bitcoin's price action and what it could potentially do after the halving. And of course, we know that Bitcoin tends to rally exponentially after the halving, but we have to see these fears subside, these global fears. We have to see coronavirus become contained and not be a global pandemic anymore. But the NVRV is saying that this is an investment worth making, which is quite interesting, because if we just zoom in here, every time we've seen Bitcoin reach the NVRV, it has actually bottomed below the green area. So let's just do this here. You can see that every time Bitcoin bottomed here on its ranging period, right over here as well, and over here, it slightly dips below the green area. And this is essentially the maximum point of financial opportunity. You can think of it as this dip. You can think of it entirely as this moment where we see consolidation within the green area. You can see it as that as well. That's perfectly fine. But this is the absolute bottom in terms of the NVRV and the absolute bottom in terms of Bitcoin's price action. Now, the question is, are we going to see further downside in the NVRV and potentially to revisit the very bottom and even dip below this green area, which would essentially mean that that's the maximum point of financial opportunity for Bitcoin? That's the question right now, because the NVRV is also suggesting that we are on the cusp of a new bull market, but we need to have that bottoming period first. And as you guys know, we tend to see bottoming in the form of ranging periods like this, where we see consolidation for a few months, like this as well, consolidation for a few months, or we see volatile V bottoms, roughly speaking, volatile double bottoms in this case here, but we tend to see volatile bottoms or ranging periods where we see these ranging periods for months on end. So that's what we have to be looking for. Are we going to get a ranging period for Bitcoin, and are we also going to see further downside in the NVRV green area where we would probably also see a ranging period like we tend to see over here? Because essentially speaking, this ranging period follows the ranging period in price as well. So whether the old bull market is over or whether it even happened to begin with, as the NVRV here is questioning, we have to just focus on the next bull market. And the NVRV is suggesting that we may be on the cusp of a good financial opportunity for Bitcoin, and that's something we have to focus on going forward, because if we see signs of a ranging period develop, that's going to be a very interesting time where investors will be slowly scooping up Bitcoin at a severely discounted price. So the NVRV is suggesting that there is some potential downside to be expected, as well as we might dip further down in the green area, but that the risk of downside is now getting smaller and smaller as price declines. We have to bear in mind that the prospect of potential future reward is much greater than that. But of course, I understand that people will want to catch the absolute bottom, even though it is quite difficult to do that. But having said that, we might be on the cusp of a new bull trend emerging, but this will of course take many weeks and maybe even months, depending on how Corona and that situation resolves. But in any case, if we look at different analytics, or at least co-integration. If we look at the stock to flow model, we can see that the co-integration relationship between the stock to flow and Bitcoin's price action prior to the halving, we can see that the volatility is being accounted for. We've seen a black swan event which invalidated a lot of the pre-halving price tendencies for Bitcoin, as we spoke about earlier. But in terms of co-integration, this volatility, this black swan event has been accounted for. It's still within the volatility bands for the stock to flow model. And in fact, Plan B, and Plan B of course made this chart, Plan B has suggested that we've seen these volatile moments even get out of the bands, below the volatility bands, like here, or even here as well. So even escaping the bands isn't an outlier event. So the stock to flow model is still very much valid, so it'll be very interesting to see how Bitcoin's price catches up with the stock to flow model after the halving. But first and foremost, we have to see how Bitcoin and the NVRV will bottom within this green area. That's something that's going to be very interesting to watch out for going forward in the next few weeks and even months. But in the meantime, that's the end of this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, please consider dropping a like, and of course subscribe for more videos like this in the future. I'm Rekt Capital, and I'll speak to you very soon. See you in the next one.